Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for whoever is watching this and joining us on this debate today. And thank you to our amazing speakers. We have what I like to call a bunch of great people, a great bunch of great people joining us today to talk about startup ideation and talk about whatever comes up in the conversation. We already had a set of good laughs and some enjoyable time in the background. So I'm expecting this debate to be very open, very no filter, very honest and fun and engaging. So who do we have here? This event is, most of you already know that this event is organized by Univenture Builders, by SOMA Services and Lispolis. We have Carlos Mendes and myself, Luisa Baltazar, as co-hosts and co-moderators of this event. And then for our debate as speakers, we have Jonathan Littman. Hey, John.
Welcome.
Joining us from Sausalito, or almost Sausalito and almost Boathouse, right?
Perto a San Francisco.
So we have California represented here by two people, and Jonathan Littman. Oh, by the way, I'm not going to introduce a formal introduction to the speakers, or none of the speakers are going to do an introduction of themselves. We have posted short intros and bios about all of them. So feel free to go to our event on LinkedIn or to go to our social media if you want to check it out. At the same time, we're going to add their names and subtitles. So at any moment, if you don't remember who the speaker is, you'll just wait and you'll get the name, and then you can search them on LinkedIn and follow them, as well as whatever their endeavors that they're having at this moment. So anyway, as I was saying, Jonathan Littman, he's joining us from California. He's an expert in innovation and ideation and the author of a few books. Then we have Santos. So we have two Josés. So we decided democratically that we're going to call one Santos and the other one Veiga. So to make it easy. So this way you guys can reference easily to whoever we are referring, okay? So Santos, José Santos, he's actually from Boston, but so it happens that this week he's in Portugal and São Pedro do Estoril, so he's quite close to us. And his expertise is in design, user experience. So he's going to bring a little bit of that background into the debate. Then we have Veiga, José de Veiga.
Hi, everybody.
José is joining us from LA, and he brings a wide experience from many areas, but I'm going to refer just to two of them. He's an architect, and he's a technologist. And I also know that he with a 3D printer and his garage print almost anything and everything. So I'm excited to have his inputs about everything. And then we have Fernando Aires from São Paulo, Brazil. And he's joining us as an investor with a background in intellectual property and a biohacker. So yet again, another person, and a podcast host. So just follow his podcast, right? So anyway, so this debate is going to be, as I mentioned, it's going to be very hit the ground running. We're going to start the debate, jump into questions, and jump into getting a little bit of the point of view of these four gentlemen here, and learn a lot from them, I'm pretty sure. Thank you for accepting our invitation and for joining us. Okay, so 5 minutes almost of intro. Let's do it. First question for all of you, okay, and it's just to get the topic going. And here we want your point of view, and no filter, no bullshit, no nothing. You know, just whatever you think it is, just share with us.
Careful.
What is...
It would be dangerous to have no filter.
I know you don't. Maybe the debate will end at the first question. We'll see. Or it will last for hours on end. We'll see. But anyway, so what is the true worth of ideation and design thinking in innovation? Is it a need to have or a nice to have? John, you start, please.
Well, I'm fortunate. I collaborated with IDEO on a couple of big books, Art of Innovation, 10 Faces of Innovation. And I am not a designer like Santos here, but I was fortunate to be around brilliant designers for 6 years. David Kelly, you may have heard of. And I've seen an evolution. So I'd like to give a little bit of a historical perspective. IDEO designed physical products at the outset. They designed medical products. They designed laptops, screens. They were industrial designers. And they started to really grow in the late 90s and in 2000. And I wrote my first book with them actually in 99. And then it was all about physical products. And what I've seen is this evolution of the concept of innovation go from physical products to actually experiences. So IDEO grew then and did tremendous work actually in healthcare, which, right now is a huge issue, of course. They worked with Kaiser, they worked with the Mayo Clinic, and they looked at experiences, and they started with empathy. So our panelists here know empathy is core to design thinking. And what they did differently is they actually pretended to be patients. They actually a woman pretended to be pregnant. She actually pretended to have a baby, believe it or not. And IDEO being brilliant, they pulled this off and they learned things. They learned, in track and field and sports, we talk about a handoff. Right? You hand off the baton. And often in a experience, there is a missed handoff. So they learned, for instance, in the maternity ward, there was a big missed handoff actually at the time of having a baby, which is a pretty big pain point, right? If you're trying to have a good experience for a mother, opai. So they started expanding this definition of what innovation was, right? And they started pushing it to new areas where when I was working for them, they had a lot of secret projects. And one was with a very large country that wanted to innovate their country. Can you imagine? So we go from, a screen, a laptop screen to an entire country. So you're starting to look at services, experiences. And of course, this early phase of innovation was big companies, right? This was sort of before the startup craze, before entrepreneurs were as broad. And so what I've seen is this shift of innovation being about products to innovation being about process, right? And that when we come now to this current wave, and I have a new book, which is called The Entrepreneur's Faces, where I talk about taking essentially sort of a design approach to yourself as the person who creates the product, as the person who's part of a team, that we move from physical things to thinking holistically about how we come up with ideas and how we build ideas. And interestingly, some of the designers have not been, always successful in this world. And that's something we can debate a lot, because there are many ways to be successful now. But I would say one of the things I'm very excited about right now is we're in a new phase, right? There's this little thing called the pandemic, and there's this reality of the digital world. So when I think about design thinking now, I'm working with a company, Funny How in Portugal, another company out local, and we're thinking about digital culture and digital collaboration and your collaborative intelligence. And that this is changing dramatically now in this year, in these 2 years, in a way that it might have only changed in a decade because of the crisis. So design thinking is changing dramatically, and a lot of it is going to be individuals and teams creating new models for processes to collaborate and come up with great ideas and iterate and prototype.
Okay, so moving next to José Santos. Santos, can you take a shot at sharing your opinion?
It's hard to go after Jonathan because he's got so much experience, but also exposure. He was with the gods of design, and the gods of design thinking. I mean, in reality, the term design thinking, Mr. Tom Kelly probably coined it. And even though Bruce Nussbaum also played a lot with it and then tried to escape it, but it's there forever. And I don't think that anybody can do anything about it. And designers themselves have had this love-hate relationship with design thinking because they thought that, a lot of them still think that it was giving away the secret sauce. When in reality, the more people are out there that are enthused, that are championing, that are participating, that are learning, that are applying through design thinking, through empathy, through iteration, through prototyping, the better it is for designers. And in reality, because design thinking does not live without design doing, those two things will always allow all the designers, the crafters and the thinkers to come together and do design. So for me, I mean, if you're going to innovate, be it in products and services, I'm an industrial designer. So I remember the first moments when toothbrushes started showing up in beaches and people started thinking about the impact of products and sustainability and all that. And so, and I've been evolving into the digital space because a lot of the digital experiences are commanding a lot of what's going on. But I don't think that anybody can really innovate in any domain without the principles of design thinking, without being user-centric, putting yourself in the shoes of, and many times putting yourself in the shoes can be dangerous. I will not risk in ever trying to look like I'm having a baby because it would be a mistreatment because so sometimes and actually partners, designers and other people, they play this role playing a little bit too much. I actually sometimes tell them to get out of and to go really be with the people, go see a woman having a baby and you'll quit. But the reality is you got to do all these phases. You got to embrace design. For me, the ideation is a different thing. I feel that a lot of times people confuse ideation with perspective. And those two are not the same, even though they many times they one influences, of course, the other. If you have a perspective about anything, about life, about anything, then that's fantastic, and you should have. And if you're going to be in a partnership with other people, I hope you do have one. And ideation could be something, can be spurred, can be incentivized, can be taught, can be helped, can be supported, can be facilitated, and then it's important when it happens. But I've worked in so many situations where people, to be honest, 50% of times I've been in situations of ideation. It was for initiatives and for companies and for people that didn't need ideas. They were trying to solve the wrong issue, by, let's have ideation and generate more ideas and et cetera, when in reality, their problem was not about ideas. Maybe it was process, maybe it was understanding reality, this and that. So perspective and ideas or ideation for me are different. And then, people tend to forget, but one of the most important things about ideation is, and also co-creation, which is the new fancy name for collaborating and ideating in partnership, is about co-ownership. So a lot of times ideating in groups, with other people, it's about co-ownership. It's about making something together that you can both own and you can both feel proud of, and you want to work on top of it. It continues to be a problem when somebody has this bright idea, brilliant idea, and then tries to shove it down other people's throats and try to make them own it. And usually that is That is a sure recipe for a problem. So I don't, if you ask me the true worth of ideation and design thinking innovation, design thinking for sure is core. Ideation, yeah, bring it on, but let's make sure that you are really ideating because you need to ideate. And so pay attention to what exactly you're trying to get. And for me, it's not a nice to have. Now, there are situations where maybe you might require more or less of it, but I don't think you could do without it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, Fernando, you're next.
Sure.
Want to share your thoughts?
Sure. So I'm going to put my my virtual investor hat on and try to approach ideation from an investor perspective. And the way I look at it, ideation is more of a fancy word for the process of solving real user problems. To be in their shoes, understanding their needs. The late Steve Jobs was known for giving the customer or the consumer a solution before they even knew they had a problem. Or in other words, figure out what they're going to want before they do. So in my opinion, I think ideation is a need to have. The ability to be in the customer's shoes is something that is needed. But how much time and resources you use doing that highly depends on the startup's product and consumer. So what do I mean by that? Here's some real-world examples that I've been part of. When I was with Apple managing third-party intellectual property, I had numerous small companies pitch their products. The level of sophistication of the engineering audience, us, I was a program manager at the time, was very high. And many amongst us had intimate knowledge of the IP function. And we knew the difficulty in doing it right. And the startup presentation had to predict our questions and thoroughly impress us on how they solve the problem. To show proof of what other customers that were successful using their product was crucial. If your product is highly technical, such as a software app or a hardware where the end consumer or potential acquisition target, in this case, a large business like Apple, you better spend a significant amount of resources showing real data and how you solve difficult technical issues. You need to have that. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, I also, as an investor, enter into negotiations to purchase a coffee company in the US. They had a growing coffee shop. They had plans to open another coffee shop. They have a bustling wholesale business. They were servicing large companies like Intel in Phoenix, Arizona. Their quote-unquote secret sauce was essentially a proprietary roasting process. And they had an artistic atmosphere at the shop. They had a warehouse where they brought containers full of green beans from Brazil. They had a beautiful family farm in Brazil. And it was very impressive how they were growing their business. I got interested and started looking at investing in their company. As they looked for investors, there was very little ideation trying to solve what the customer wanted. A process they had to do to get the investors. It's a simple product, in this case, coffee and related products, and it has lots of competition. In this particular case, for this startup, numbers speak much louder than anything else. As a matter of fact, in this case, the deal fell through because of a difference in valuations, nothing more. I wanted to use profits, they wanted to use revenue. There was no issue of them not understanding the customer. So in summary, to me, the more sophisticated the combination of the product and the quote-unquote end consumer, the more ideation you need to do, and vice versa.
Okay, thank you all. So this kind of set the tone and your positioning towards our debate, and we seem to be all in agreement. So I don't expect this debate to generate any how do you say sliuma a conflito. I'm missing the word in English.
Conflict.
So, but anyway, I'm going to start asking specific questions on specific topics, and now I want to address our audience. You can send us questions to each one of the speakers or to the general panel. Just use the chat, okay, to send us your questions. At the end of the debate, we're going to choose at least one per speaker and ask the question. And if we see one or that is relevant for the whole panel and we still have time, we'll use the time for that extra one, okay? So just use the chat and send us your questions. So regarding the start of an idea and the start of a startup, okay? As some of you mentioned, creation, product development, all of that, and the value and importance, the need to have ideation. So at the early on, when forming the idea, forming the concept, coming up to it, how does one get it done? Because if one is ideating by himself or by herself, it's just a person, right, alone in a house, sticking Post-its on a wall, and trying to shove down an idea to his mom, his friends, or other people that he's interested in pitching the idea to, right? And how much of ideation should have been done? How much should have he talked more with other people? In Portugal, for example, we know that no one talks about their ideas because they're afraid that the idea gets stolen. And here, Fernando, with your experience in intellectual property, you let us know if there's any relevance to that. But there's this concept that, oh, no, I shouldn't talk about it until I have it in the market and I'm ready to go to market and all of that. So how can one ideate his or her own idea? How early on should someone start the ideation process? Through the idea itself, or later on after having the idea just to test? Because sometimes people have an interest in an area and want to solve problems, have a lot of problems, but need help to come to a valid idea. Okay, so Veiga, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to move on to John. Okay, so whenever Veiga stops talking, John, feel free to jump in. Okay.
I thought you had forgotten about me.
No.
So
I'm like a mother. So just to say, I'm like a mother that loves all kids. I love you all of you. So I'm going to do my best to be democratic.
Yeah,
it's not a perfect process.
Speaking of kids, I was thinking about John's example about the hospital and kids being bored, and I was thinking at some point they should have a no handoff by the second or third kid. I usually tell my kids that maybe the hospital has a return policy when I'm not happy with them.
Monty Python resolved that very easily.
So about ideation, I think that it's important to distinguish between process and how do you get to the process, right? Because there are two separate things, in my opinion. I think the question was, how do you get to ideas, and what's your process of ideation? I think everybody has their own, and I think that sharing ideas, in my opinion, is always good. I mean, some companies now put out their patents and their creative material out as open source in a way, because I have this thing on my website that goes something like, I think Steinbeck wrote this, which says ideas are like rabbits. You get a couple and learn how to handle them, and pretty soon you have a dozen. And I always tell people that ideas are a dime a dozen, right? So you have an idea. I have a lot of ideas. There used to be a joke when I used to teach design, which was, I'm an idiot like everybody else because I have a lot of ideas. And I think that the idea is not to have an idea. The idea is to execute on an idea and figure out what works, right? And I think that the origination of that has to do with a lot of other things, like, adjacent possibilities. You're not going to invent something you're not close to. So this is why it's important to have the experiential kind of, ability to throw yourself into things. I always say, by the way, I had a thing here, which was ideas are a contact sport, and if I open my mouth, I'm going to get hit by, that's me having ideas. And I think that ideation is that, right? Like, you have to throw yourself into things. I have a tendency to overthink things, I guess, most people do. And I've learned that the best ideas come out of experience, come out of experiencing things, throwing yourself into it, and actually doing. So I talk a lot with companies in Portugal for many years now, and I see a lot of hesitation in not only sharing ideas, but actually throwing themselves into it. And I said to you, Louisa, when you sent us, I think it was the first images of our, the marketing images, and you posted them online, and you said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we posted them without asking you guys." I said, "It's okay. Fire first, and ask second questions later," right? Like, and I think that, that can be misused, but it does represent the idea that you have to throw yourself into the playpen, right? You have to go in the sand, maybe get, your teeth, kicked a couple of times, but that's what it is, right? And I think that people overthink. People, we know this from politics. People's memories are very fickle, so people forget things very quickly. I've had a million calls about different topics with people that don't even remember what I talked to them before. And the first thing I have when I have an idea is exactly, I guess John already talked about this, and it's the idea is, go for it, right? Like, go for it. I think that why you have the ideas, which I think Fernando is kind of alluding to, has a lot bigger scope, right? So I started as an architect. I was a programmer. I had, my first startup actually in Portugal, but, I had a computer since I was very young, since the 70s. I'm dating myself. But, the idea is you have to understand the environment you're in. And I think the environment is very important. I mean, there's a lot of discussions these days. Why San Francisco, where all these companies come from? And I think it has to do with the environment John is in, which is, and this is what universities all over the United States have done, which is you bump into people, right? I always tell people, when I got to LA, I had dinner with somebody that won the Nobel Prize for finding out black holes, and she was just a kid using a telescope in Hawaii, and we had this very interesting. She was sitting right next to me, and that's how ideas come about. You're aware of what happens. This is why you go to universities. This is why Stanford is so successful, and some of the MIT, etc. As a matter of fact, Frank Gehry designed a building in MIT, attempting to achieve that with architecture. I thought it was interesting, but that's basically it, right? Like, you don't just ideate, right? You have to have an objective. And I think the method part, and I'm going to let John talk, but the method part is really what comes after, right? And I think that now we've evolved in the last 20 so years. And I had a book, which was, I was going to say, speaking of books, because everybody has books in their bookshelves. And I was saying, this is a really interesting book I always go back to when people talk about, design thinking, because I think it's an overused term these days. And he does say what Fernando was saying, which is you got to find out what's the problem you're solving, and really finding out what's the most important thing that you're solving. And many times people ask you to solve the wrong problem. As a matter of fact, I reread that chapter last night, and he says the first thing that I do is when somebody gives me a problem is I try immediately to not solve what they told me and find out what the problem is, and it drives them nuts, right? And I've had this happen many times. I see a lot of smiles because some people might know better than I do even what that means, but that's what it is. You have to look for the problem, right? And then the method begins, and people talk about the cycle, which if you're an architecture, this is how you develop things. So I've had some advantages of having been initially educated as an architect, which is you prototype, right? And then you put it in front of the customer, and then you maybe build a mock-up. And, if you go to any architectural office, Frank Gehry, you name it, any big architectural office, this is what they do, basically. They build scale mock-ups, increasingly in size, until you finally get to the final building. And many times you're building and you're really inventing things, right? And everybody that has done any construction, even at home, knows that this is the case, right? You look at it and you go, we missed something. Wouldn't that look better there? And that's the design process, but that's a lot more about, that's well documented now, I would say. And I'll let John speak because,
Well, that was great. I'd like to build on something you just mentioned, which is place. So in my new book, we think about an entrepreneur go through stages, and one is finding their place. My father was English. I spent a lot of time in Europe, but I was born in San Francisco. In Lisboa, in London and Boston. These are places, right? And São Paulo, certo? So you, as an entrepreneur, I think you have to find your place, and that is both physical now and obviously digital. And your place is your network, your community, and you have to build that. And there's an extra challenge today. So when I think about ideation, I think often, young people and old people think of it in a transactional way. They think, I need this idea for this great new platform I'm going to make billions on. And I think of ideas as a holistic process where, for instance, right now with my co-author, Susanna Camp, we're writing a story about side hustles, this concept that almost all entrepreneurs, as they develop, have side hustles. Well, what is a side hustle? The side hustle often turns into the startup. And the reality is, a gentleman we're interviewing right now was one of these guys who was a coder in New York, a place, right? He realized he was well paid and he didn't want to tie himself down to a full job. So he decided to implement something Google used to do, the 20% rule. Our audience has probably heard about, which didn't happen for that long at Google, but it had some pretty big successes. And the idea is you can spend 1 day a week on your passion. And the idea is that passion may lead to a real product breakthrough. And it did, Gmail and several others. And so this gentleman decided to do this on his Fridays, right? And so he said no to high-paying work on Fridays. He worked the other days. And he told us just the other day that every single one of his startups came out of the 20%, came out of the days when, what did he do? He actually just helped other people with their ideas. So this is the biggest thing, having been to Portugal. I adoro Portugal. Lá muito medo de fracasso. Nah? There's a lot of fear, fracasso, right? A big failure, right? And there's less fear in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in New York, in London, other places. So if you're in a place, and the places will come back, the places, of course, co-working places, cool cafes. We have an amazing place I want to invite everyone to come back to in San Francisco called Shack. It's in the Ferry Building. This guy said in his co-working place, every time he helped someone else, there was an opportunity for a new company. And he said, 80 to 90% of them failed, and one got him into Y Combinator, and one got him millions of funding. And so I think one of the things young people got stuck on is that they're looking for an idea today, where I would encourage them to be looking for 20 ideas. And as Santos said, not every idea is going to turn into a business. That's another thing, right? And you could have a great idea, and you don't have the right partner, you don't have the right equipa, right? And you lack investment, you lack focus. And so I think that this is a big change, because what happens? Our youth go to great universities, and as Vega mentioned, the universities are essential, right? You have good universities in Portugal. I went to Berkeley myself, University of California, Berkeley. Of course, we have Stanford. These are places, networks, communities, and there is a challenge now in finding this community, finding this network, and so when I talk to people about ideation, I believe you have to have, people talk about having meditation as a practice. And I think you should have ideation as a practice. And you should have colegas, amigos, sócios, e fazem prototipagem, fazem ideias com eles. So too often people think of themselves, right? So actually the history of startups is that when you're generous, right, and when you share the money, the credit, beautiful things happen, right? Yeah. So you can join a good idea, you can help bring your talent. You may have a skill in marketing and the other person may have a skill in technology, and you will start building on the idea.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, there's a saying, kind of a saying, and it's something that I consider one of my values, is the rising tide rises all boats, right? So, and I think that what you just said, it's just that, John. It is
exactly.
So the next question, it has already kind of been answered by some of the things that you've been mentioning and saying. To have or not to have a co-founder or a partner, if it's relevant for ideation, and especially in early ideation. So you already tapped into that, Santos, when you mentioned co-creation and the value of co-creation. John and Vega, you also mentioned that, and John with ideation as a practice and all of that. So I'm going to ask Fernando to try to go a little bit deeper and see if he, and again, if possible, from a perspective, an investor perspective, if he sees the value of how a co-founder, because many times startups, when we see that a founder has the idea, starts the idea, and then at some point decides, oh, I need a technical guy. I need to go find a co-founder. Oh, it's more pleasing and interesting for the investors if I have a co-founder and then if I have a team. So, and we as mentors and experts helping the startups, many times we have a hard time trying to explain to them the value of having a co-founder, how they can bring other skills and other perspectives and all of that to it. So, Fernando, all of this to say, to have or not to have a co-founder or a partner, because it can be partners in the business, is it a value if part of early on and with ideation, with collaboration, with co-creation? And once you answer this question, then Santos, you'll take the word. And if you can go a little bit deeper into co-creation and how you think that can be a value as well, and that we would appreciate. Fernando, go.
Sure. So Luisa, I think the answer to me is obvious. The answer is sure. Having a partner, having somebody that is with you and complements your skill set is crucial. But as with anything, it needs to be organic. It needs to grow out of necessity and a need to present your company in a better light, especially having an investor hat on. I lived most of my life in the Silicon Valley, and as presenter of startup ideas and a receiver of startup ideas, NDAs are your best friend. This is standard, and if people in Portugal have a different approach to this, I'll be curious to know what that is. But that was the first thing that we would do, regardless of the size of the company. Now, as far as your partners, I think it needs to be open kimono. You have to share everything that is relevant in order for the company to grow. Yeah. Ultimately, you need a leader. Of the partners, of the people that are involved, you need a leader who intimately knows how and why the problem needs a solution. As an investor, you're always looking for the guy that really got it. doesn't have just the marketing side or just the technical side, but the guy that really has a complete view of what is being being done or being attempted to be done. One thing that I wanted to mention is there's a common problem with entrepreneurs. I don't even call them entrepreneurs yet. It's more like people with a product in mind. Entrepreneurs need to be more rounded and understand how to run the business. I think it comes later on. And the problem is that they don't connect necessarily emotionally with the consumer or the buyer of the product. They just can't understand why the product does not sell itself. Why don't people just get it? Why do I need to explain and understand them? And I have an engineering background, and this was very common with engineering types that turn into entrepreneurs. They were in love with their software. They're in love with their IP, with their hardware, whatever. They saw no flaws. Some people would get upset when they would present something and questions would come up, or they would doubt that they had the right data. Why are they trying to show me this data? And at the end of the day, the real world kicks in, and people have a limited amount of time, especially with large companies and people that look at presentations all the time. You need to be very crisp, and you can't just get wrapped up into this no flaw syndrome. So they should have a non-technical person next to them to help present the company and understand the subtle clues of negotiation, because at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. I also I mentioned earlier my experience with the coffee company, and I just want to bring this up, I think it's relevant with beverages in general. Beverages sold in supermarkets, for example. Competition is brutal, right? The distribution, the partnerships that you must have, the margins are tight. The influencers that can make or break the company and shelf space play a much bigger role than the product itself. So again, you see the entrepreneur falling in love with their beverage product. To them, this is the best thing since bottled water, right? They think that just because they have organic ingredients, zero sugar, great taste, people would just buy. Obviously, they never ran a small business of any sort. They don't understand the dynamics of selling that completely overwhelm the product itself. And you see this. I mentioned engineers, but I can pick on teachers, lawyers, etc. They should have a partner who understands the brutality of competing. It just needs to happen.
Yeah, very good point.
I'm learning, which is fantastic. Just listening to all of you guys. The thing about, I was talking about before, perspective and idea. The reality is many times I found that 2 or 3 people can align on the same idea, the big idea. But what makes the team, what makes the interaction rich is when they bring different perspective, different experience to the table. And that usually is the best way for you actually to understand how resilient they are and the idea by itself, because it's from that contrast of perspective and experiences that the idea will either live or die. When I co-started with a number of friends and colleagues, Beta E in Portugal, etc. In the beginning, we all had different roles, and I was the so-called the design agitator, and I was basically asked to go in there and to poke holes and to make people upset, but many times just to try to understand how in love they were with their ideas and how open they were that those holes would be, created. And sometimes, yes, you can be mean, and you can do that in a way that you can destroy people's self-confidence. But I was there to help, not to destroy. So in the end, the process was always a benign process. But in reality, many of the questions that I used to ask is, because the difference between being a founder that started with you in the beginning, or somebody that you decided to pick up along the way because it looked good, or in terms of perspective, in terms of the optics, it's all very different. When people come together from the beginning and they do things together and they actually fail together, they've actually had, I remember there was a couple and we said, we actually have been a fight. I broke his tooth and we both went and I said, well, that's good. You guys are still together. So that's a good sign. So it's the dynamic of what they are as a team, but also what the idea had to go through in order to get to where it is. It becomes an important part. So co-creation is, for me, it's become a way of life and a way of doing anything and everything, and both from an internal perspective, from an external perspective. we've kind of regimented as a company co-creation, discovery, framing, ideation, and building. We try to do that, in sessions of 2 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months. And so there's a process to it. There's tools, there's templates, but above all, for me, the two most fascinating parts of co-creation are actually the first two, discovery and framing. So in the discovery, it's incredible because we all believe that we know about a certain topic and have a certain point of view. But it's when you really bring all these different people and different ways of looking at that particular issue or problem that you're trying to solve, and you go outside of the confinements of the typical, you go get somebody that is actually doing that on the ground, or somebody that services that from the back, or somebody that has to deal with the pains of doing this or that. So all of those things, when you go through the discovery period where you try to bring everybody on the same page, it's fantastic. And it's mind blowing because you see people that are supposed to be experts in their area, that their eyes go like this because they're listening to things like, for the first time, they see in the room somebody that it's on the 3, 4, 5 steps away from what they're used to, and they're like, so that's great. And then the framing, to trying to understand where we are and where we're trying to go to, try to create some sort of vision that people can align on, try to understand the in and out of scope, try to re-question the initial question, ask the real question, poke about what is it that people are trying to solve. All those things that you do in the framing before you go into ideation ends up being the most important part of the whole co-creation process. Because for me, those are, that's the quality of the ingredients. I usually say the quality of the cookout depends on 2 things, the ingredients and the cook, which many times is the facilitator that knows how to cut through and stop the bullshit and stop people in their tracks and this and that. So that becomes an important element. But also the ingredients that you bring to the table, that end up being, then ideation actually, it can be swift, it can be fantastic. You can have all kinds of people that go through the process that are able to contribute, that are able to feel valued and valuable onto the ideation, and it becomes easy. But discovery and framing, oh yeah, put some money on that, put some time on that, because that in itself can dictate the ideation process of the co-creation.
I was going to say I agree. It's so much more important to get different opinions from many people. As somebody who's right now working actually on something new in a way. By the way, I'm the quintessential I have a side gig kind of guy, so I don't know what life is without 10 side gigs, but Louisa knows me, so she knows what I'm talking about. It's not just 3D printing, it's all I'm going to say. But I think that you're absolutely right? Like you gotta find people to give you feedback. As far as co-founder, by the way, as somebody who's given probably more than 100 pitches to VCs and has been on the other side and has heard more than 5,000 probably, I got to say that you need a co-founder because you need somebody to cry on each other's shoulders when you go to this phase.
Hell yeah.
Forget about the ideation. It's more like emotional support.
Consolation.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think having a co-founder, I don't know if the ideation, so I'll tell you my own experience. I've done a few startups. I've worked for a few startups. It's usually a person has kind of intuition, and then he goes through this phase that I guess Santos was saying, Jose was saying, which is you bounce this off of a bunch of people, and in that process, somebody along the line tags along to your quest, and it becomes kind of this quest. I mean, founders usually are like Don Quixote, right? They're finding windmills and they need a Sancho. And when you see partnerships, usually it's like that. I mean, you should pick somebody who's actually, I'm gravitating more and more towards this, which is you should pick people that are unlike you and maybe even annoyed with you. And I love the fist fight idea, although having invested in some companies and been part of that process, it can get really ugly. And it's usually why companies die too, by the way. So be careful who you pick. And be careful in the beginning. I think that the being conscious of what you're doing, and I see, by the way, this a lot with Portuguese entrepreneurs, which is, when you start talking equity, by the way, with companies and you want to invest, people start backing out. People don't understand that all boats rise when the tide goes up, etc. And I think that even between partners, that can be it needs to be addressed. But that's a different topic. As far as ideas go, I think that in my experience, every time I found a co-founder, or you found me, it always has been that sign that we're onto something. So if you have something that's itching you and you start talking to people and then somebody says, I really like this, and they start getting involved, and usually it's actually a start getting involved. Nobody just shakes hands and says we're going to be partners. It kind of organically, I guess Fernand was mentioning, kind of happens. Then then you're on it. Then you're on a quest, and you've got, it's like every, I mean, I it's maybe poetic, but I see every startup as kind of like this epic Star Wars like adventure where, has a lot more ups and downs, by the way, a lot more downs than ups sometimes, but that's what it is, right? Like, and you got to be ready to commit, and at some point, I think the true and the true founder are people who have committed to something because they're obviously in love with it, or they can't move on without answering or figuring out what the heck this is. I've unfortunately have sinned by following this rabbit hole too far, and you've got to know how to bail out too. I didn't know that there was an eject button, or that you should have one. Just a word of advice. I got some gray hair and stuff, so and scars, and so it's also good to know. Right? And actually, it's good to have somebody who's a realist if you're a dreamer, right? So I always say the best teams that I found and that I've seen succeed after investment and working with them is there are usually teams. It's kind of like Wozniak and Jobs. Jobs was a crazy hippie-like thinker, big picture guy. And Wozniak was a almost atom level, detail oriented guy that could put little things together to, do stuff. But the reality is that when you know what that entails as far as understanding how things work, that is a completely different mindset. I mean, Jobs used to say, I play the orchestra, and Wozniak definitely doesn't even know. He only knows the strings, right? And how to take the instrument and, put together.
Let me jump in. A great example. Have a new book, Entrepreneurs Faces. And so Wozniak is the maker, right? And then this is a very popular type in Silicon Valley. He's the prototyper, he's the technologist. And, Jobs was both a visionary and a superb evangelist, right? So I think there are at least 10 different types of people. And when you start to become aware of them, you start to see these types. You start to understand, the visionary can drive people crazy, right? Because they're 2, 3, 5 years ahead, and a more practical person on your team is not there. And so I think this is something we, as founders, need to become more aware of someone's type, and to really respect the maker, because the maker is the guy who's going to create this prototype, test it, see if people buy it, right? But if you don't perhaps have the visionary, you're not going to be jumping ahead to digital learning in 2019, right? And be ready for this new wave.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. By the way, I am now putting together something that involves investing and working with companies. And one of our big conversations is, how do we profile people? I know that's kind of a dirty word, but it's entirely that. I think that in my experience moving from doing to, I guess, helping do and investing in people who do, that's exactly what you just said. It's exactly it. Like, you need to know what the team is made of, because I used to say looking back, within, I don't know, less than 5 minutes of a conversation with the founders, you knew these people were going to get somewhere or not. I don't know. I've heard this conversation, the Y Combinator, I can't remember his name, but anyway, the guy started Y Combinator, says he talked to the guys from Airbnb, and he was like, once they told me the cereal box story, I knew that these guys, didn't matter what they were doing, they were going to get somewhere. And I've had the same kind of feeling. But then when you start thinking about it, there are reasons why you get this feeling, and that's, I guess, something that's unexplored. So I would really be curious to see your book.
Well,
that's it. I'm buying it.
I'm an evangelist too, so
You said you wanted to see it, so you see.
There you go.
Wish is granted. Yeah.
I like how suave John was with let's just.
Well, the biggest thing, having been to Portugal many times, we've got everyone here has spent a lot of time in the U.S. Portuguese need to lose some of their humility and their modesty when pitching. We like put lipstick on a pig every day in San Francisco, right? And get millions for it. And in Portugal, you have revenues and a real business model, and unfortunately, too timid too often.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
I actually just decided that my last question, it's going to be absent of any type of humility, and I'm going to do a sale pitch of services and whatever. Just wait for me.
Speaking of lack of humility, John, I want some commission because I think I was a spike on Amazon in the purchases of your book. So
I'm happy. And share the wealth.
There's a sale hook at the end of this debate. Just now from now, there's a sale hook.
Just John, just to jump into this. Sorry, Luis, I'm going to hijack it for a second. But since John mentioned that Portuguese need to lose their humility, I'll give you just a quick story. Back when I was with Apple again, we used to work with this company in Porto. It was an EDA company, electronic design automation company. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to mention names or anything, but the engineers in this company were phenomenal. I mean, their competence, their thoroughness, how hard they work, how well they spoke English, how good they presented the data, and they were personable, which is, you can't say, that about a lot of Silicon Valley people, but it was just a pleasure working with them. One issue is obviously the pay scale and how much, the difference between an engineer there and engineering or in Portugal and in the Silicon Valley. But as Apple employees, we love to go visit these guys. Not only technically they were excellent, but they were just pleasant to work with. And this is gold. People need to, I agree 100% with you. I want to pile on it, lose their humility, show it off. There's a lot of gold there. I've seen this firsthand, and any opportunity that I have, just like now, I bring it up because it is truly remarkable.
Yeah, and when things come back, there's a direct flight, Lisboa, San Francisco. So, and there is a real, actually, we're the West Coast, and you are the West Coast, right? You're the West Coast of Europe. We're the West Coast of the US. The countries, Portugal is almost a small California. It's on the edge, right, of a continent. And I think Portuguese people, I believe, are a little more entrepreneurial than some other countries near you in Europe that we won't name, where there's very much a big company mentality often. And so I'm very hopeful for Portugal in the coming years.
By the way, I'm going to engage in some regional, rivalry. I think LA is much more like Portugal. I'm sorry to tell you.
Oh, uma luta.
Oh, now it's going to get ugly. Yeah.
Okay, moving on before this gets too ugly, too early, too soon. Okay, a little bit of a change of a subject. And you'll understand when I ask the question, you're going to understand why John is going to be the first one to answer this. And also Santos, okay, because I want John's experience on ideation and design thinking and all of that. And I want Santos' expertise on design and how to collaborate and co-create and all of that, okay? So how are startup founders changing how they ideate during the pandemic? How has design thinking morphed during the age of Zoom and Slack?
It's a great
John?
question.
Yeah,
in this, yeah, in this new book I just mentioned, I got to attend Stanford Launchpad, and Stanford has several incubators. This particular incubator is just a class. It's unbelievable. It's a 10-week class, and in 9 or 10 years they've had $500 million of exits just out of college students, right? Taking this 10 weeks and then starting companies. And it is taught in the D School, the design school, this famous school originated by Kelly. And it's a place of Post-its, right? It's a place of whiteboards, Post-its, and it's a place of doing. They do brilliant, simple things like midway through when the companies haven't had too much success with their product, they bring in lemons and ice and cups and say, whoever sells the most lemonade in the next hour keeps all the money from all 10 teams, right? And I was there when a team, believe it or not, made $2,500 selling lemonade in 1 hour and took in $5,000 because, of course, they changed the business model, right? So they changed and made it more creative. You were giving money for female founders, right, for on their journey. They were giving a tour of Stanford. So here you have this wonderful incubator where it's a very physical experience, and you come to class every day, and the professors are brilliant, and you're getting out and you're doing things, and that seems to have been taken away, right now during the pandemic. Yeah. So I actually talked to 2 of these young women just a few days ago. They have a startup with a modern tampon. So this is a bit of a pain point for women. If you want to be an elite athlete, you don't want to have a reason to go off the pitch, right? Off the competition. So this great idea. So when you ask me, like, how are people ideating today? I think actually they're using people like Fernando, which I will get to in a moment, which is that they take this holistic approach. So these young women were lucky to come through Stanford. They're lucky to have VC backing. And what they've been really intelligent about is building mentors, advisors, and coaches on this journey of iteration. So one of their coaches who has a tiny equity position is Claudia Kochka, who you may know is sort of a legend in corporate innovation at Procter & Gamble, who was a core client of IDEO, and Procter & Gamble was one of the first great consumer products companies to embrace design thinking. So these young women amazingly have this incredible senior woman to advise them on what we were just hearing about. Fernando was telling us distribution. How do you get in? How do you sell your product, right? You think you have a great tampon, but good luck at selling that. So they also have mentors, and they also have coaches. This is a huge thing growing, and I know Fernando is a coach. We've seen phenomenal growth in startups being advised by their VCs to have coaches to specifically coach for 3-6 months longer, usually paid or a tiny equity. And so they are helping, like, say, prototype an idea. So what you're having to do now, because you can't go to Stanford and you can't go to your great co-working place or an office, you have this human network, through Zoom and so forth, of people with different roles, and the role of a mentor and advisor and coach are all different. And you have to be very thoughtful about it, and you can't have too much advice, right? That's as bad as too little advice, or worse, right? So that is a part of it. But I think also what we're finding is you have to find other people in your time zone. So one of the big things we hear from experts is that it doesn't help for someone who did this 10 years ago. It is more helpful often for someone who knows the environment in the last 2 or 3 years and has very specific knowledge in the area you're ideating. So I really feel the challenge, like o desafio agora, is to find this micro network of collaboration. And you can't just rely on your past. You have to start creating it now. People are using a lot of new tools. Startups, I don't know, I'm interested here in Portugal. Notion, folks heard Notion is a collaborative work management. So there are new tools coming out to sort of help small team collaboration. I think we're going to have better tools to help you as an individual collaborate, but I would start and pay attention on this human aspect.
Okay.
So can I say something about that?
Yes. Then Santos as well will contribute.
Maybe I'll wait for Santos. Sorry.
No. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say,
Go ahead, my friend.
I think there's a tool for every task. My experience is a little bit less with physical products, even though, anyway, if I was doing architecture, it's a different story. But, most of my experience, at least in the digital world, has been digital and virtual. And I had my first, I always tell people this because most people think that you have to do stuff in physical form. And I think that living in LA, I am unfortunate that it's a very vast city. So you don't really get as much contact as in other places. It's like the opposite of Portugal or San Francisco, right? Like nobody bumps into one another here. It's very rare. It's happened like 5 times in my 24 years.
Oh, your cars bump into each other, though.
Exactly. That's the only way. Have you ever seen the movie, right? Crash or whatever it's called. So with Sandra Bullock, whatever. And so
self-driving cars.
Yeah, exactly. Now that's gonna solve that problem. No, I was just saying that I had my first virtual team in 1999. I joined a startup that ended up building Cars Direct, and we had teams in Germany and in Canada. And back then, you could do conference calling basically. Nowadays, there's a lot of tools. Actually, I have a friend he's a true repeat or a serial entrepreneur with exits and et cetera. And he's building something called Team, Loop Team. Raj is building this idea where, you can be virtual, but you have the same feeling as if you're in a real company. And there's a bunch of tools they're building. It's a little bit beyond Zoom. I've worked at a company where we were fully virtual and we used Zoom a lot. Now there's a lot more tools for that. But I'm just going to say that, my first startup here, or my second startup here, was a company that I developed with a partner here in LA. But then I had a team in Serbia, of all places. And I had a genius, by the way, architect, who was crucial for us to be able to achieve this. By the way, this was 2006 and iPhone doesn't exist, and we're doing SMS-based gaming with screens at venues, and it was insanity, but it worked, right? So the reason why it worked was we had a multidisciplinary team that was entirely virtual. As a matter of fact, some of the people on my team in Serbia, I didn't meet until at least a year and a half after we started this, and I had already been working with them before. That's how I ended up having them on my team for a consulting gig that I had, and I took the team from a project that failed and started building a company. But it works, right? Like I think that again, it's what we talked about earlier. What's the dynamic and how can you make that work is more important than what you're doing, in my opinion. I'll say this, nowadays with 3D printers, I 3D print, physical stuff can materialize very quickly. And I think that even in the physical, I'm very curious about that area, of course, but even in the physical, I think things have changed. The costs have gone down, etc. I think that as far as collaboration, distance and virtual and everybody's learning now this, I'm very happy, by the way, because I've been living on this medium for many, many years. It's not, 5 years ago, probably 15 years ago, I was already kind of a virtual person. And I'm one of those guys who grew up with a BBS. And by the way, my humble fame is my Portuguese BBS. I was on a chat forum once, and Linus Torvalds in 1990 is chatting with me about this operating system that he had just launched. I must put that plug in there. So I've been on forums and, IRC forums before. No, only the older people remember this, but anyway, the internet before the internet, etc. And I think things work, and I've been involved in these kind of things throughout the years, but they require a lot more time, is my opinion. So I had a team in Serbia. I was chatting. I had two very young kids at the time. I was finishing my PhD and I was starting a company, not advisable. And so I was chatting until 3 a.m. with these guys, and on the phone and on Skype. Back then we didn't really have Zoom. And then I would have to wake up at 7 a.m. to take the kids to daycare. So, I slept very little, and I would spend a lot of time chatting. I mean, there was a lot of conversations. I have petabytes of chats recorded that, were the entirety of a 5-year duration with a team that was more than half abroad, right? So I think it's doable. I mean, it worked, and we developed something that I'm very proud of. Again, technology is not everything, but we are very proud of the product we developed, and it was very valuable, and et cetera. And really, it worked, and I can't claim ownership of the idea. We originated it, but then the team really made it happen. And I think these days, this is what I'm loving, is I'm right now talking to people in Germany, Sweden, Portugal, England, and here all over the United States for this thing I'm putting together. And I would never be able to do this probably over a year ago, because people would not say, I will talk to you. They would say, when are you going to be in London? When are you going to be in Sweden? So now, even for founders, I think it's a huge opportunity to jump into people's living room or house. I mean, everybody's at home, right? And talk to them one-to-one. And people now are open to it, they're accepting, and they're used to it. So I try to look for the opportunities, and I think it's a great opportunity. By the way, I've been joining this thing called Lunch Club. I think it's beyond the United States now, but I've done hundreds of meetings. Somebody sent me a link when this thing was in beta. I met people in person, and then with COVID, this thing has exploded, and it's great. I have met fascinating people, some people that are actually involved with what I'm doing right now this way. Never met them in person. So that's my 2 cents about that.
Yeah, I typically say this, and it's the reality. I'm a studio person. I'm the guy that likes to go to the studio, to be in the studio, to have the team around, because there's the bumping into each other on a normal situation outside the studio, but inside the studio there's actually the other bumping into ideas, looking over the shoulder, creating things together, hacking things together. So I am guilty of that pleasure, which is to be a studio person. But at the same time, the reality is that this whole thing has brought a lot of challenges that have also created a lot of opportunity and a lot of growth in different things. While the difference between having a video conference or having a conversation or a chat, now sometimes the challenge is how to be constantly building something together that sometimes you would not be able to do, on a digital, unless you're going to become, fully digital all the time. But this has been great for companies like, not only the Zooms of the world, but also for companies like Battery, Miro, and Mural, and all of these that have grown into creating whiteboard solutions that everybody can be putting Post-its at the same time, and then you can tackle time zones, because people are always working on something that's always growing, and you can always play with that. And some of these companies are being smart enough also to say that now, send whatever you're trying to test, send it to people through virtual form, and they can do it by video or so the whole thing of doing user research also exploding, instead of because yes, okay, you cannot go out, you cannot do ethnography in the maybe traditional sense, but you will do other types of digital ethnography, you will do other types of research, you will do other types of, and actually giving people tasks to do, to create their own diaries, to create their own journeys, and bring all that together through virtual space. So there's a lot of different opportunities that will go all the way to, like you've said, to this thing of giving people a sensation, a feeling that they are in the same room with other people. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity in that. Now, will that kill the necessity, the pleasure, the vibe of being together in the same rooms, doing things in the same room? I don't think so. Like right now, when I get back to have, when I'm allowed to go back to the studio, because that's how things are right now, one of the things that I told my team is let's talk about what are the right reasons for us to go back to the studio, and what are we going to do about it when we go back to the studio. So we know it's never going to be the same thing of everybody, at the same time in the same room. I even, now I blush on the amount of people we would put in the meeting room doing something together. It would almost like sauna style. So that will never happen again for different reasons. Okay, so what are the right reasons for us to go back to the studio? And how is that going to look? And it might be we all go once every month for a week, and we all do the brainstorming and the holding hands together exercises during that week, and we fast and we meditate together, and what are the right reasons for us to get together? What are we going to do, and how is that going to look? Because it's actually, I think it's going to be really interesting, because you will then get to go back home, or to go back to your home studio, to go back to having, heads down and to do different things instead of trying to replicate this old model. I feel as being a challenge and opportunity, and also something that I'm looking forward. But I don't think that whatever we're learning now, all the tricks that we're learning, all the new tools that are coming up, are going to take away the need, the pleasure, the intensity, and even, the simple sharing that you can have when you are together. So, John, I will take you on that thing. I will get on my plane to go to Sausalito and be on that road trip, because no matter how much you brag about it, it will not be the same. Me with you there, and I'll take a bottle of Casal Garcia or Alvarinho, and we'll sit down and we'll have and those things. And what you exchange when you are within those moments, those are golden. And so those things will continue. We will continue to find good reasons to do all that.
It's funny that we're coming to the conclusion that sharing a moment, it has more to do with our human side of us as people than us as workers or performers, so it has to do more about
idiots, or idiots. Yeah.
It has to do more about inspiration and emotion than it does with productivity, because if people are taught or guided on how to be productive as a remote model and as a remote way of working, then we value more the moments we spend together. And as you say, it can be meditating, it can be fasting, brainstorming, it can be doing the bonding, holding hands, dropping off, and others holding you, whatever. But it has to do, again, actually, it has to do more with what machines, and no AI, no machine learning, no robot, no nothing can replace this. Yeah, here and here. So anyway, moving forward. Okay. Building the idea into a business. Now let's talk about the business, the money, the investment, the monetization, the whatever makes the machine moving forward. So this one will go to Fernando first, and then John. Can you apply design thinking to prototyping sales or to your business model pivot? And how can that be done, or how do you see the value of that? Fernando.
So I think the answer is, of course, you should. You have to apply design thinking. You have to understand at all times, you have to understand what problem you're solving. Only when you have real customers using your product, you will have a sense of whether or not it solves the problem you think it solves. It goes back to the idea of falling in love with a product and really not having any idea on how that's going to be sold. An interesting anecdote that I have from my previous company, Real Estate Tools. It's a software company online software where real estate investors could evaluate and track their investment, we had a subscription model. And this worked well because people would need to log in their income and expenses, depreciation, generate Schedule E's, and so on, pretty much on a monthly, yearly basis. And it worked well for the traditional income property investor, is what I call. As we move to expand the business into mobile offerings, what we realized is that the use model was different. As an end user of the iOS apps that we are offering, only as a user of these iOS apps, I understood, and we understood as a company, how consumers were using the mobile apps. It wasn't for collections of properties as it was in the online model, but rather as individual evaluations of properties done on the field. So it made no sense anymore to have a subscription model. Only an app purchase would make sense. So to us, the lesson was pretty clear. As the world and the business evolves, your product should evolve with it. Being an active user, when you actually, especially if you're offering an app in a consumer product, it will give you that perspective to solve a real customer problem as it evolves. And as we're talking about COVID and the new challenges and so on, this becomes even more crucial. There's a saying, I think an IBM executive had that the problem that the user has is an opportunity to capture a loyal customer. And I'll expand to that is that it's both an opportunity to capture a loyal customer, maybe for life, but also to fine tune your product. So, wrapping up, I think the solid answer is yes. You have to continuously look at that problem and pivot as needed.
Great. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I want to go back to Stanford when we talk about this question of prototyping sales or your business model pivot. I think sometimes these words get in the way. We say business model pivot. Virtually every startup that's successful has had multiple pivots, right? And often an entrepreneur, their first idea, they drop, they pick up one from a co-founder or someone else. And so for instance, in this Stanford accelerator that I mentioned, Launchpad, their focus in these 10 weeks is actually about prototyping sales, which is quite different from many incubators where it's about coming up with a great pitch and getting investors to invest. So they actually prototype the class. So midway through the class, you have to have a product and you show it to potential customers and investors. They had a great example. Investors aren't always smart, right? So investors sometimes will believe the crazy, pig with lipstick instead of something that actually is making money. So they had a student in this class, but this crazy idea that, wives and girlfriends can't find silly gifts from their boyfriends and husbands. So he came up with this concept and he prototyped it. So it was crazy stuff like manly gifts, potato chips and, silly stuff. And how did he prototype it? He bought some silly stuff. He used design thinking to take beautiful photos. He created Facebook ads. He was not actually capable of selling any product, but women loved it. And they emailed, and then he called them back because he wanted to talk to this potential target customer. And one wife in particular said, "Get your act together. I need this product," right? So there, everything is prototyping sales even before you're actually making a sale, right? And in this class and many other incubators, you can test with a Facebook, Google ad. And this is a really hard thing for an entrepreneur to think, how can I do this before I have the product? No, you're testing to see if there will be a product, right? if people think and it's very important to be focused, your one core feature, not 5, not 10, what's the one thing? And in this case, it was a silly gift that, husband, boyfriend would love, wife happy, everything good. The guy in 4 years with this crazy idea had 30 million in annual revenue, and virtually no investors were interested because it was silly, but he proved it with sales, right? So I think a very big thing is sales. And this is something we were talking about, the Portuguese expertise. You have great engineers, you have great, product and manufacturing know-how. And of course, the challenge for Portugal is you have to go beyond Portugal, and you have to go to the US. Fernando is in Sao Paulo. You may go to Brazil, right? A huge market there. You may go to Europe. And so you have this manufacturing maker capability. You have this talent. And what I'd like to see more of is the prototyping before. And don't be embarrassed. This is the testing, prototypagem.
So yeah. I'm gonna interrupt you. I'm gonna say you just stole my idea.
Aye.
So I'm putting together something that is exactly what you just described. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Wow.
It's an investment vehicle for doing global arbitrage based exactly on what you just said, and the idea is exactly that: how to open up the U.S. market for any company around the world.
Pode ser que precises sócio,
By the way, speaking of prototyping, I haven't spent a dime other than my time and networking. And now when I was saying I was talking to companies that are actually VCs all over the globe. And I have a problem right now, which is I'm getting the same thing that guy got with the women, which is, when are you ready?
Which is still a good problem to have, guys.
Yeah.
Whenever you have customers that you haven't even sold them anything and they already love whatever you're selling, it's somewhere along the way. I do think that the word prototyping, sometimes it gets limiting in people's heads because they immediately go to whatever concept they have in their head of what a prototype is.
Right.
And sometimes what I tell people is just forget about that word. Just go, show me what you mean. Just show me,
It's a test.
Just, whatever, I'm thinking about the cake that has the thing on top. No. Give me the cake. Give me the cake. And so when you do that, people actually, a lot of times, they either have no faintest idea what the heck's going to be. And when they try to do it, they'll find out, or they do. And actually they're able to put something in your hand. And then you look at them and you've just prototyped and they go, oh. So sometimes it's also to break these barriers and to just say, no, just stop thinking about this shit. Stop talking about this.
I completely agree. I think it's because prototype was in the physical world. It was industrial design, your world. It was something that took weeks or months to make. And now a prototype could take a minute or 5 minutes.
I used to say to my students when I taught design, which was, if you didn't bring anything I can put on the wall, I'm not talking to you. Right. And I say the same thing to entrepreneurs. It's like, you have a great idea. Great. I've got a million ideas. I woke up this morning, I was showering, and, do you really want to listen to it? And the thing is, show it to me. Right. I think that's.
And sales is the same thing. Sell it to me. Okay. Or sell it. Go out and get 3 people to buy it for you. The lemons, I don't know how that guy did it. I love it. Just the thing is, unless you push people into, but actually do it. And even, it's not going to look good.
Right.
I just, so that's what I think that many
turns
times
off an investor more than a quote unquote entrepreneur to be doing or having an idea for years and years and never acting on it. That's a sure sign that's not a good bet.
Yeah.
Bias to action, right? By the way, I was going to say something about the lemonade. I'm really curious about this story. Here in California, I actually think this is a true story because my daughter was in Girl Scouts, but there was this girl that beat all ever records of selling Girl Scout cookies. Maybe people in Portugal don't know what this is, but anyway, one way that Girl Scouts raise money in the US is by selling something that's very popular called Girl Scout cookies. They're addictive. And so this girl apparently figured out the best sales strategy, which was she went and fought in front of pot stores, which is now legal, and she beat every sale record ever. And they sold like
Brilliant.
So there you go for market fit for you.
Right. Well,
Question.
just to connect on the lemonade, one of the best lemonade teams. Now, they only had 1 hour. They ran to the dorms with the lemonade, and they put caffeine powder in it, and they sold it as like coffee, door to door. Because these guys would go and pay ridiculous amounts for a Starbucks. And they made that group made like $800 an hour selling lemonade coffee.
Wow.
Being creative.
Improvisation.
So moving forward, and now I'm going to switch up a little bit the next question, and I'm actually going to call in someone else to do this question, because you guys mentioned we shouldn't be humble, we should be realistic of the value we have to offer. And my next question relates into accelerators, venture builders, incubate, all of that. And you guys have been mentioning the relevance on how they can contribute or not. So I'm going to call in Carlos Mendes, who's been quiet there at his corner with his many books behind and working hard on the questions. So please do stop adding questions, names for a little bit. And I'm going to leave you with the next question. Can you introduce the next question, related it to Union Venture Builders into our panel, please?
Yes, thank you, Luisa. I'm here hearing the wonderful insights of everyone, and now I would like to discover or point some directions for the founders. We work with founders, and we want to help them in the pathway of building their startup, of transforming their idea into a startup. And I've been seeing by all of those examples and insights that you mentioned before that they need to test, to understand, to discover three main things. For one side, they need to test if the customers want their product. On the other hand, they need to discover if they can build it, if they can do it, they can come up with the right product. And in the other hand, if the economics work. And with those three vectors, they have an idea, a view of the potential success of their business. Okay, this is only the beginning. We are not mentioning the right execution, but that is before. So on that three vector perspective, as venture builders, that's what we do. Venture builders like Union as well as other accelerators. How can we provide ideation value when building a successful startup and successful and strong business models? How can we help founders? How can we give them tools to prevail and to make a great ideation process? That's a question that I would like to put first to Jonathan and Santos, and if the others have some ideas and some insights about that, I would like him to answer also.
So it's a great question. I actually played football, soccer, the real game, right? In college, and it was pretty good actually. And I love football, and I guess you have Benfica. There are many other teams, and they're in Portugal. And I think accelerators should look at, like, if you were like, Barcelona or you were Real Madrid, you should think of years and not months, right? So you sign players when they're 12, right? Or 13, right? And they develop. And you should think of the whole sort of the country of your accelerator, and that there are certain people who may be ideation people who may be on a startup, and you should think about how they may be able to share their talent with other teams. One of the problems I think sometimes with an accelerator is you start to become silos, right? So the teams may have investors, one team may have a tight focus, and so there isn't this actually what we call sort of cross-pollination and sharing of ideas. When actually what you'd like to happen is there's sort of multiple teams, you'd like people to actually shift teams, right? And sometimes the best thing for a small team is for it to collapse, right? And for others to join. So I think that's very important. I think we were talking about tools. I'm sure many of our listeners are starting to use Mural or Miro. These are, the digital quadro blanco, digital whiteboards. And I think accelerators need to be a lot better at teaching the mastery in the art of collaboration. That sometimes we get like too quickly into, okay, you have ideation, now you're prototyping sales, now you've got to start developing the tech, you need more investment. And the reality is there should be constant ideation, because the odds are you're going to have to pivot, you're going to have to change. So I remain shocked that a lot of entrepreneurs and even people in good companies haven't mastered these new ways. And we heard, I think we just heard a moment ago that things take longer, right? We talked about doing things internationally. You may have to talk longer. I think in innovation, we talk about the journey a lot, the journey of innovation. And I think ideation happens before ideation, right? So the pre-innovation is the foreplay, right? And we need the caresses and the kisses before. I mean, let's face it. And so if you want great ideation, you have to have other things that, as I mentioned, I'm working with this great company, Funny How. You have to have a culture. And so that has to be a new culture now, because most incubators, it's fairly new to be 100% digital, or maybe at some point 60% digital. And so that is a very thoughtful thing. And you can't just try to copy, a meeting for coffee, or copy meeting, for a bar, or whatever. You have to invent something new in fresh. And so I think it's really important to focus before and after, right? Get away from the transaction, right? So what happens after you have a good idea, right? And what happens before?
You go into action, which is our topic number 2 for our event series. Dun, dun,
Fantastico.
I like that face up there, Louisa. You can call the attention for sure.
I think I can see you even.
I can see you.
Pay attention.
Again, it's hard to follow John, because he's got a lot of experience and he brings forth things that I think everybody here in the end agrees with. My experience And I've actually been paying a lot of attention to those folks in Boston from Mass Challenge, because they've done a very good job throughout the years. I remember when they were starting to pitch, they were pitching as the biggest accelerator in the world, and $10 million, and that seemed like completely absurd. But then when you are in Boston, you understand the dynamics of it, and etc. But the two things that I think that, and this is for your question, Fernando, one is create this ecosystem. I think the best thing that Union and other people, I think it's create the right ecosystem, which has to be varied in terms of people. It has to be fluctuate according to the needs. It has to be, for all the moments, for when it works and everybody's happy, for when everybody's crying and everything is broken down. It has to have the right level of thing. But this ecosystem it's incredible, because the reality is that a lot of times this job of founding a company, it's pretty kind of lonesome. I mean, it might be 1-2 people and their dad and moms, etc. But it seems that the whole world is kind of either not ready, against them, fighting them, trying to steal them if they believe that, and sometimes that's not even true, etc. But so having the right ecosystem, and of course doing that in digital terms, it requires also a certain finesse and a certain. I can see Louisa; she can. The reality is that thing of creating the ecosystem is good. And then the second thing is about resilience, because the pivots, the failures, the breakups, the whatever, because people that are in this street, they're usually people that are passionate about this, and they do this because they can't live without doing it. It's the side gigs that you cannot live without doing. Everything goes a little bit beyond rationality, but then resilience becomes really important, because if you're going to go through this journey and you're going to keep being active, dynamic, adding value, being generous, a lot of people, they drop out because they cannot deal with the rejection, and then they just stop even giving others. When many times I've told people that have failed a number of times, I says, you know what, you're a fantastic mentor. You can really help other people go through these cycles if you just get over it and just, okay, you failed 3 times and okay, hey man, just join the club of everybody of the 99% that have actually failed. Find your job, find your place in the ecosystem and give, because who knows, maybe in 6 months, in a year time, 3 years time, you will meet somebody and that thing clicks and you will reboot. So it's about creating the ecosystem and then providing all the right solutions for that resilience to take place in, because it is a learned thing. When you are a kid, sometimes kids are not necessarily resilient. Sometimes parents push them into being resilient, all of these different things. So it can be a learned thing to be resilient, to be able to fight for your ideas, and to be able to build on top of other people's ideas and just keep going. The Duracell battery thing, you need to create that ecosystem for that thing to happen.
So I agree. I mean, I think that the biggest challenge is how do you help? So I think of accelerators, et cetera, venture builders like Union. You really have a role, and by the way, I'm saying this because I'm thinking a lot about this lately. You have a role in preparing the teams for what they might encounter. So I think there's a huge role of doing kind of the simulation in a way, and weeding out the kinks before you actually go into the main stage. So I'll give you an example. I have a sailboat, and a year ago, by the way, I was spouting about like a digital, etc. But before COVID, a year before COVID, I decided to do something which was meetings on the water. And so when you're on the sailboat, it's really interesting because you might meet these people, and I did this not only with startups, but I'll keep it for the startups. It's really interesting to bring people who think they're important, like venture capitalists, to do this kind of stuff. But I'll just stick to the entrepreneurs. So I'll bring entrepreneurial teams, and I'll tell the guy, listen, we're going to go sailing, and it's not all like cocktails and watching the scenery. We actually have to do work. So bring 2 people more from your team. And usually it'd be the co-founders and somebody else and whatever. And the moment they step on the boat, I'm basically driving, and I have to tell them what to do, right? Like pick this, do that, etc. And it's really interesting to see how the team manifests itself when thrown. By the way, I wouldn't tell them much more than this. So some people knew sailing, some people had never been on a sailboat, and it was really interesting to see. And I think incubators and accelerators, et cetera, can really perform this role. I mean, when I was interviewing, I was like involved, and I've been involved in a while for, selecting companies to invest in. One of the things, the guy I used to work with, which annoyed me until I asked him, like, why do you always do this? He would be the biggest asshole you can think of in a VC meeting. I mean, he would say, your idea sucks. This is shit. I've seen 10 companies like this in the last week. Why are you guys different? And he really didn't want an answer to that question. He wanted to see how the people reacted. Because to him, the impact of this question and your type of personality and how the team actually reacted when challenged there on the spot was much more important than any answer you could give. I mean, he didn't give a rat's ass. He had no idea. It could be about anything, biotech to, it doesn't matter. And I learned something important. This is why I came up with this idea of meetings on the water, because it's like you throw them off balance, and then you can see, in engineering, and I've done quite a bit of it, you always look for the edge cases, right? You never test a system on its normal state. The happy path is the happy path. What you try is, that user is going to crash your system. I have hilarious stories about systems that just blew up because somebody's last name was wrong, and the concatenation of the last name of the person, whatever, basically was the command that crashed the system. And it's a true story, right? You would never guess this, right? There's the idea of chaos monkeys, et cetera. And so I think an idea of being an accelerator is you will be the chaos monkey trying to burn out the system that is the startup. And I think for team dynamics, and even, in sales, for example, I do a lot of sales too. It's tough. You can't plan everything. You really have to have a system that can face the adversities. It's like the Paris-Dakar cars, right? Like, you don't develop a car for any environment, because you got to be able to cross creeks and go over sand dunes and, impact a camel and still keep going, right? And it's kind of the same thing, right? You got to prepare them for that. You got to build that machine. And I think a lot of teams are not even aware this is a thing. I think you're right, a lot of accelerators focus on the techniques and the methods, and, there's a lot of programs, it's like almost like a university thing. But the question is, all of that counts and all of that helps. But I think that the big deal is, like, how do you prepare this team to go to battle? I mean, I by the way, I'm saying this about sailing because I've been sailing for over 20 years, and I compete. I've not on my boat. I compete on other people's boats. I wish I could have my own race boat. I don't. But basically, the idea is, you will never. There is never a plan that and this is every plan dies in the battlefield, etc. And it's true. Like, the dynamics of the team, and I've learned this because I've been on losing teams and I've been on winning teams. And the truth is, when the team gels, and the gelling has to do with, we've spent 2 seasons getting our ass kicked and learning about each other. And so I'm on a team right now that is winning because we spent 4 seasons. Unfortunately, COVID kind of threw this away, but we were winning last season because we spent 3 seasons basically doing exactly that. I mean, we did all stupid thing that a person can do, and we stuck together. And that's another thing, resilience and sticking together. One thing I've learned with my startups is, staying power is a very good guarantee of success. So if you can stay in the game and you keep the same people and you learn about each other, you're probably going to succeed in the market, et cetera. Anyway, so I think accelerators to me are really that space where you can do this safely. And it's kind of like theater school or something. You can pretend to be a tree in the wind and nobody's going to laugh at you.
That's a perfect segue.
It's a perfect one. I'm gonna steal that one. Okay, next one. Still on into a business, building the idea into a business. And last question. This one is for Fernando and Veiga. Okay, and I need you both with your investor hat on. Okay, and zero filters. And I need your honest opinion, just as you've been doing all along this panel. Okay. How much does it weigh for an investor to know you applied ideation to your business idea? Is it that relevant? Does it tip the balance? Tell us.
So I guess I'll go first. It is crucial, as I pointed out earlier, but to the degree, again, warranted by the sophistication of the product and the end consumer. I'll put it into perspective. As Luisa mentioned in the beginning, I do a lot of biohacking. And for the people that don't know, biohacking has to do with changing your environment around you, inside you, to control your biology, to hack your biology, improve your performance, whatever you do. Well, that world has a lot to do with vitamins and supplements. It's a big part of it. Any entrepreneur that is venturing into this space and wants to put a company together, although I think it's a very difficult space to break into, I wouldn't advise it. The entrepreneur needs to solve the problem, right? What is the problem here? People are trying to get more energy, trying to get more things done. They need more focus. They have some vitamin deficiency, whatever. But the end user, there's a myriad of end users, right? End consumers. As an example, women might react one way to a particular supplement. Young male teenagers might react a different way. As an investor, if I'm quizzing the entrepreneur, I need to see an intimate knowledge of all possible reactions that could come up by these different human bodies. And the one that has the depth to understand the regulatory issues, the biases that people might have, how different times of the month people will react to these supplements. You need to see that deep knowledge from the entrepreneur. As an investor, if I smell a superficial knowledge, I will turn away from the company.
Yeah.
But again, for certain products and certain startups, it might not be as important, as I gave the example of the coffee company. But in general, I'll say as an investor, it is crucial. It is crucial to know you're talking to someone that knows their stuff.
So would you say, kind of to wrap it up, and before we pass the word, would you say that it's crucial, it's relevant? You, as an investor, would want to know that they had applied ideation, but you would want to know the value that brought, meaning not use it as a buzzword. Because to be honest, I'm sick and tired of people using words as buzzwords. Right. It defeats the purpose, because it becomes this thing that everyone talks about, but no one understands the real value that it can bring. Right. So would you say that a startup just says, and we did ideation, where it doesn't stick, it doesn't work? But if it goes specific to, we used ideation in our UX process, we did it like this, and we learned through it that this and this and this was true, and this right. So it's more of not the use of the buzzword, but actually explaining that the value found, or the solutions or the results found through ideation, were applied to a pivot of the product, to a pivot of the business model, to a check. So it shows how they learned, what they learned, and how they applied it, right?
Yeah, of course. That's exactly it. You need to start a series of open-ended questions to see, what the depth of that understanding from the entrepreneur is. How much have they thought this through? All of the ramifications, and as I mentioned, the legal issues and the reactions, and the side effects, and so on, as an example of biohacking. It is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, because it's easy. Sorry, just to finish. It's easy to make a slide, to create a PowerPoint slide or a keynote slide that it's all fancy and pretty with the word ideation in it, explaining how deeply it impacted or the core of the product, or how it shook founders and conceptions and assumptions. That's where I think the true value of ideation and design thinking and of innovation really, really can bring difference. John?
And I would just add, I completely agree with Fernando. Having taught a fair amount, college and graduate students, the superficiality of ideation is often shocking. They look at something and say, I want to have a shoe a woman could wear, which could be a high heel or, a tennis shoe. And isn't that a great idea? No, it's not a great idea. It's been done 100 times. It's actually never been done well. Come up with more ideas, right? And then make sure somebody hasn't already done it and isn't selling it, already.
It's killing ideas. It is an easy expression. It's important to kill bad ideas right away, quickly.
Right.
So let me put my my investor hat on, and now that I have my investor hat on,
Hey, that's a real hat.
I could not resist, being that I'm in the United States. I wanted to appeal to this stereotype. And with my investor hat on, I love that expression. I'll take it off. No, I was going to say, you're right. It's I don't know, when you look at investing, many people do what we're talking about and don't give it a name, right? So the buzzword is not. I mean, it's increasingly people are using it as a buzzword because it becomes kind of something that is expected, and this happens a lot, right? Like it's like when VR hit the ground, everybody wanted VR. If you said anything VR, I mean, every investment. I mean, I've been in real estate, was the same thing. At some point, was like destination-based retail, right? And so everybody had to say that, even if they didn't have it, right? That's one thing. So you got to filter for those things. I'm more interested in two things. One is when we look at a company, you look at a company from the outside and the inside, right? From the outside, it's like customers. I don't care. I really don't care. I care that you got somewhere, you got something that's valuable, that the customers don't even know how you got there. So until recently, nobody really knew much about this stuff. Now everybody talks about it, but Apple has been doing this for over 3 decades, right? I mean, this was the brilliance of Steve Jobs, was, okay, he's a designer applying design principle. I mean, if you look at Apple University, it's crazy. It's like an architectural design and design thinking, whatever course. It's crazy. I mean, every designer, it's like design for designers, basically, for engineers. It's crazy. And so they've been talking about this, right, forever. Customers don't care. They want to click on the phone and, how much does it cost? How do you get it? And does anybody else have it? And does it make me look cool, basically? And oversimplifying. But as an investor, you got to look at it this way, right? Which is not necessarily as a consumer, but it says, like, where's the value that these people have produced it? I think for the stage of investment, this matters more or less, right? So I've never been a late investor, but I always say that big companies they need this, right? They need, and now there's a cottage cheese of this. I mean, Boston Consulting Group as kind of an innovation, but BCG Media, digital media or something, they're kind of a VC / they're here in LA, but they do this kind of stuff. And it's like IDEO have done this forever, right? They invented this model. But when you go to startups, it's like, okay, if I'm an angel and I'm doing, $50,000, $25,000, $100,000 level investment, that really matters. It really matters because it describes to you what we were talking about earlier, which is like, how does this team work? What are they doing? How are they solving this? But what's the technique, or I don't even know what to call it. What's the dynamic that they're using to get to an answer and get somewhere? The story of Instagram is really cool because this is I mean, I know a little bit about the story closer, but they got about $1 million or $4 million or something like that. I think it was $4 million to develop this idea, and they ran to the ground with money. And Instagram was a Hail Mary pass of like last hope. We don't have even developers. They had laid off people, so they developed a minimum viable product, which was really a undressing of something they had been spending a lot of money on, right? And then that worked. The reason why they did that was this is how these guys thought, right? They were constantly experimenting, and we talked about all this. So at that stage, really matters who you're getting. Do they understand this? I mean, I always say you want to invest in early stage startups. Get somebody who's done design or has been an architect. Of course, I'm biased, but But it really is important because we're all taught this. I mean, everybody who started with a blank piece of paper understands what this challenge is. And, I have a patent, I've developed engineering, I know exactly what that means. I've geeked out about lookup tables and algorithms. I mean, I have a PhD that was basically computer science. I understand all that. So that's important. But the truth is, how do you develop the problem? So in design, I don't know if everybody's going to agree with me, but it used to be this conversation, at least in architecture, where a building is never done. Because when you start designing a building, you're really starting to develop the problem. And your problem evolves along with the solution. Mm-hmm. And so what you're looking for is, are these people really trying to, and by the way, one of the things that changed my life was that day I saw that quadrant kind of graph where it says, are you solving a problem that has a known solution for a known problem? Or is it a known solution for a problem you don't know? Or is it, et cetera? Yeah. And then startups are usually in the unknown solution to the unknown problem. But most people approach it with, we have a solution and we're looking for a problem, or we know the problem and we're just looking for the solution. And I think it's actually more like you are defining the problem. I mean, big companies have done this, and again, Apple, but there's many companies who do. Nike has done this, which is they've kind of created a problem. That's why people look at them. These guys are geniuses because tennis shoes were the solution, but somehow they've created much more than that. And the reality is they also invented the problem while they were creating the solution. And so it's this synergy of evolution of what are you doing that really matters when you look at a team. But I'm saying this, and at the same time, if I'm investing, and not really often this shows up, but if it's a very hardcore technology, like, I don't know, some guy who invented MPEG-4, compression, MP3, et cetera, at that point, you've got a solution that's just looking for a problem, or, you got the right solution for the right known problem. And so it really is, you can't blanket statement this and say, yeah, everybody should be using design thinking, which is how these trends and buzzwords and et cetera come about. It's really about, and by the way, design thinking, like I said in that book, the guy starts by saying, design thinking is really about asking the right question. Are you solving the right problem? And I think that it starts there.
Yep. Sorry to interrupt, but I think what you mentioned is really, really relevant, and it would be enough for another debate, which is the problem versus solution and the reverse process of it. And it's something that more and more, and we're here, we're mentors, we're experts, we're teachers, so we bump into this the whole time. We're consultants, and we provide consultancy for startups, so we all know this, that they come to us, and may it be investors or not, with a solution, and they're just justifying the problem. And I haven't come yet to a point to say if any of those are wrong or right, or one is right than the other, more right than the other one. I think both can be a path to finding the right fit, because you can bump into a solution that was a solution for your problem, or you see the capability, the possibility of doing it. Then you need to validate it. You need to cross-check it with others. Again, ideation, validation, again, all of that, to see if there's enough market, to see if it was a single event, to see if you're being blind to the reality. And anyway, it would be more than enough to create just another debate about that, about the two paths of a problem versus solution, which is the base for a business. It is the number one base, and then it's the business model. But you can't do a business model if you don't know what you're selling, who you're selling to, and why you're selling it to those people. So, but anyway, I just wanted to chime into that, because that's one of my passionate topics ever. It's exactly that one. Sorry,
I just want to build on one thing. You mentioned Nike. There's a great book for our listeners, A Shoe Dog, and of course Phil Knight was the visionary, and he had a maker. Bowerman was the track coach who was prototyping on his athletes to win championships. He became the Olympic coach. So this ideation was happening, with the coach, literally with a waffle iron, melting. And I'm old enough to have one of those early shoes. But there was this great maker ideating and testing on the young athletes and forcing them to try different weird shoes, which created an entirely new industry.
Yeah, speaking of books, it's one of the best book ever. That and the book about Pixar. What's the name of the book? I'm trying to look at my library on a phone, but it's I don't know if you've read it.
Something about magic?
Creativity Inc. No, it's called Creativity Inc. It's Ed Camhill wrote a book about how Pixar came about. It's really a good story about investment resilience and betting on long-term creative, the timeline, long-term creativity. But that book for Phil Knight, I think it's an autobiography, right? The shoe dog.
It is, and there's a third character. So they had the visionary, they had the maker, and then there was this guy, I'm forgetting his name, who was the evangelist, who drove to all the track meets and
he was an athlete, actually,
from his truck, right?
Yep.
Okay, moving on to our last question, which I'm going to switch a little bit the question around, because since you guys have been mentioning everything that is relevant to what I do and to what we do at SOMA services and to what Union does. You've been, John, for example, you brought it up over and over. Every one of you brought it up, the value of facilitators, the development. I think it was Santos who mentioned that, and mediators, profiling with HR and finding the right team, co-creation, all of that. Action plans, finding action plans. And this made me think, us at SOMA Services, that's part of what we do. We do consultancy in a further ahead stage of a business, of a startup, before they have the structure, the full structure for it. And so the question was how services, a network of services and of support can be a continuous source of ideation and innovation. So, but now, for a startup growth. But now I want, from your perspective, because come on, there's consultancy companies, there's like a ton, right? And everyone promises the última bolacha do pacote. We all sell the same. We all sell our expertise and our know-how. And to be honest, little actually go into defining processes and defining methodologies and defining, which is a passion of mine and a passion of Ruth. How can we, companies, networks, and how can services and support provide sources of innovation and of ideation to startups while they're growing? What do you think they need the most? And I'm going to be taking notes.
I
already do HR and all of that you mentioned, but I'm going to be taking notes.
I would turn that around, because what you are missing is the opportunity as a service company to use the startups as your testing ground. So you're asking the question that, because now let's be honest, you know what startups usually don't have, the good startups when they're starting, is money. So the reality is you're never going to really get paid. You're going to buy equity, this and that, but etc. So what you have is an incredible fertile ground for you to develop and prototype and test the right services that these startups and these entrepreneurs and these wannabe entrepreneurs really need and want. Because what I feel that sometimes is that these companies, they start by defining, this is what we're going to give you, this is what we're going to provide you, this is what you're going to have, accountant service, you're going to have all these different things, which are usually made for grown-up companies and are usually made for an entirely different thing. And so the opportunity here is the other way around. Look at all these people as your customers, your users, and tell me, how are you going to prototype these services and how are you going to use them as guinea pigs to test? Because if you do that, then you'll crack it. And once you crack it, then you can expand. So Just another way to look at the problem. Okay.
I think I need to have a call with you. But again, and this I think this is relevant to many, maybe many of the listeners. If our audience are startup builders, they'll know what services they may be looking for, and if there's other people that are providing services, they also can see how they can match what they have to offer to startups, assuming that everyone who's listening to this video at this hour is related to a startup. So Veiga, you can go next.
I can go if you want.
I'm just going to say something that popped to my mind. I mean, your question is a little tricky, and I love the flip it upside down that José Santos suggested, which is, you're asking the wrong question. I would say quintessential or typical designer approach. But I would say I thought about this, and you're thinking, I mean, really the boils down to what's the differentiation, right? So how you differentiate it? Because I'm a believer that you can only compete in two aspects in the world. It gets much more complicated than this, but this is the Michael Porter kind of old thing about you either compete on differentiation or cost. You're not going to compete on cost, otherwise you won't make any money. You'll be poor. Exactly. You can't scale this, right? Like, it's not scalable, and that's the biggest problem these things have is you can't make a lot of money, but I have the same problem right now, which is, chicken and egg, right? Yeah. Until you're successful, you don't make a lot of money, but, you also can't compete on scale. So forget about doing 50. You can do 4 well, you can do 10 more or less. And then from then on, it's disaster, right? Yeah. And everybody has this problem, and even big VCs, is scalability is a problem. And I think that the question is, and José Santos is right, which is, how do you face this problem, right? Like, what are you offering like this menu of, like you said, accounting and all these things, or are you trying to help, like I was trying to mention, which is with things that you can't get as a services company? You said there's a dime a dozen of consulting and et cetera, and I agree, and I think they're important, by the way. I think marketing services, et cetera, you can't do everything. You can't advise somebody. Nobody knows everything. I know nothing, by the way. I'm like, I try to be a T. There's this theory about you're either a line or you're an I, and I'm a T, which is I know something's really deep, but I know how to get deep on something. And the main reason why I did a PhD was exactly that. Like, how do I go deep on something? But in general, I try to read about everything, right? Like, I read Phil Knight's book. I read Design of Everyday Things, and et cetera. And I try to be informed mostly. But I think that you can offer something that nobody else is offering, which is exactly that, which is things that are not accounting, they're not marketing, they're not PowerPoint support. Anybody can do that these days, and with time people evolve, but how to think and what methods to use, and even a network of people or and this is, by the way, the biggest VCs, the biggest investors, everybody wants to get to them. I mean, it's like universities, right? You don't go to Stanford just for the education, sorry. You don't go to, universities. You don't go to Harvard just because it's the best education in the world. It's because you're going to meet the best people in the world. They were selected, et cetera. I mean, I always say this, investment is a marketing business. You have to market to people who give you money to invest, and you've got to market to entrepreneurs who will come to you, because if you're good at marketing to them, then it's like a population, like any other genetic population, right? The top candidates for success will come to you, and then your success is almost guaranteed, right? And I always say, it's like in music, it's like in acting, once you make it to a certain level, then all the best scripts come to you, and then suddenly you're always in the best movies, right? It doesn't matter how good of an actor you are, you're just going to get the best parts, the best directors, you're going to work with the best teams, and then you're successful. It's kind of the same thing. Well, I see you're trying to get a word in, and I'm done.
In Portugal, tem Fernando Pessoa, nah? So this is a country that believes in poetry and words. And as a guy who wrote 10 books, I would say storytelling, right? Yeah. So I'm amazed at how little knowledge a lot of entrepreneurs have of storytelling. And the story can be what you tell someone when you meet them for 1 minute, right? Or 30 seconds. And obviously the story is your pitch, right? But the world changed. You know, I'm a guy from, I worked for Playboy for several years. The media is now in your hands, but that's a tremendous responsibility. And you have to use design thinking, right? And you have to use artistry to create a great story. And we know Fernando and others here, the story matters, right? You have to have the technology, you have to have the target, but it really matters. So I think the more you can elevate the craft of storytelling at every level, and you have to tell a story to your staff, right? To your new hires, right? So I go with words.
So I have to say that the meaning of my question, it wasn't on a perspective of the business providing the service. My question was actually on a perspective of the startup. But since you guys started giving advice, I got it wrong.
Well, I'll say to that. So I'll tell you from that perspective. I've had.
Let me just, because I really want, Jose Vega, I really want, and John, I really want your point on this. We have at least one or two of our clients that we're on ongoing evaluation and validation of their business model and going through the whole process. And it's not until either the founder or the startup starts the process that they realize the value of getting this help, of getting these services, there's this misconception in Portugal that the founder should know all of it, should know accounting, should be a master in IT and a master in finance, and an entrepreneur should know everything and should build the company and should be able to predict scalability and do a financial plan and a marketing plan and a business plan, which is not realistic. It's not realistic. So if a person can't see what's around the corner, it's hard to explain to that person what's around the corner. And I think we, the mentors, the experts, the teachers, we have failed with transmitting to them the path ahead. Because once they're doing the path, we have a client at this moment, and it's a huge business, manufacturing. So it involves risk analysis, it involves production. It's just the SWOT analysis of the business. It's a full afternoon of work. But it's not until they do the path that they understand the path. Am I making sense? So, and if we are the experts, if we are the leaders, we should be the ones finding a way, as you say, John, with storytelling or whatever, of making them understand that this is not something they have to do. It's something they should do. And there's a value for them. So it was in the perspective of how do we bring the light into the startup founders and so they understand it's so clear to us and it's so easy for us to understand the value of doing the path. How can we do a better purpose, a better service?
You're there. I mean, you're there. It's empathy, right? Because they're everything's new to them. They don't realize what Fernando knows. There's going to be a battle and they can't do 10, 20 different things, right? And so it's creating this as a journey, as a map, and it's not easy to do well.
Yeah.
Are you talking about existing customers? Are you talking about you have existing customers?
Examples, yeah. Yeah.
So if they're already your customer, I advise you to just slap them around.
I like that.
I must say this, by the way. I've been trying to bring companies from Portugal actually to the United States for entrepreneur that I found to be the hardest. Last year, I had a company. I even found investment for them, and I had a feeling that was the case, which was, you had to do it. By the way, it's a one-man company, which is doing really well in Portugal. I really like the space. Anyway, I think that in my view is you got to be able to fire customers, right?
Oh,
So I used to do design and I had architecture, and some people come to you and they say, well, we know everything. We just need a guy to draw up some drawings or make some pretty pictures. And at some point, if that doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you got to move on because they're not your customer, right? So it's a customer selection process that you got to fix, not necessarily, you can't, I mean, certain things you can't change. I have talked to some Portuguese companies that I'm not going to mention names or companies, but some of them are quite big. And I always have this conversation. I tell them, listen, in LA, there's more people than there are Portuguese in the world. And if you came just to sell in LA and you sold the same way you sell in Portugal, it wouldn't work, because I can't drive around LA like I would in Portugal, and Portugal might even be bigger than LA. I've never really looked, but you know, it's impossible to cover that much ground and at many companies and meet people that way, like you would, you know, let's have a coffee or let's have lunch over there, or let's go to, you know, I don't know, Nicole or something and have a cake, whatever. It doesn't work, right? Like that's not how things work. And I see a lot of the issues is, a lot of the issue is conveying this message that, you know, you're buying yourself into something that maybe you don't believe, but you have to suspend disbelief and I'll hold my hand, I'll take you, right? And I think that that's the only advice I can give is, I mean, I've said no to a lot of people, or better. I've actually been said no to a lot of times, right? So I've talked to some big companies in Portugal and they say, well, we already know what we want to do. We just need a guy on the ground in America. I'm like, I'm not your guy. Go find somebody else. Because what I offer is not something you can just hire somebody to do. And I mean, of course you can, you're hiring me, obviously, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not a service, it's not accounting, it's not marketing, it's not just graphic design. And it never really is if it's going to be good, right? The best graphic designers are not just guys who know, I don't know, Adobe tools, right?
But in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, you get a mix, because sometimes as a mentor and as a professor or as an accelerator, you not always get to pick our responsibility.
That's a relationship thing, right? You gotta put the right things in. So at Oxford, you can't walk on the grass unless you're a mentor or you're, you know, the person who brought you in walks you on their hand. This is a true story. I mean, if you go to Oxford, you cannot walk on the grass except if you're whatever, the senior person who's ahead of you gives you their hand and walks on the grass. True story. And so that's what you got to be, right? You got to be the person that says, here, hold my hand. I'm going to take you to this dark room that you're afraid of. And basically you might get knocked a couple of times, but that's what this is. This is not just a happy path. You know, I'm just going to do some stuff that I can tell you. Sometimes you can't even say the problem with these things is like every design problem. You can't know the answer before you begin, right? Which is pretty much every service business. You're paying me to eventually do something that has value, but I can't give you the answer before I do, right? And that's really the problem you're expressing.
I would like to say that it is, in my point of view, a matter of framing the steps, because when they want to build the company or to start a business, they want an outcome, and in the cases they understand for achieving that outcome they need help, they need someone to help them on that pathway. They came to us, experts, and they ask for what they understand is the right answer. Sometimes we have a different answer for them. We have a different view. We have a different vision for their problem. And two things happen on that situation. Sometimes they don't see the vision and they go someone else or somewhere. And sometimes they don't understand the vision, but they have to be willing to believe and trust that our expertise ended up to getting them to the outcome they need, but they have to be willing to make the steps to make one step at a time, by the hand with us. I like the vision, the image of the hand, because sometimes it's expertise made it with tutoring, with sometimes it's almost family. The relationship, it's almost family.
Right.
But those steps have to be understood. They don't see the vision at first. They don't see all the pathway, but they need to understand the first step, the first part of the way, and after that they understand the second part and the third part, and the pathway becomes more clear. This is the way I see it in my experience working with startups.
Here's a funny little story. I know in Portugal you make great shoes, right, in the north. So we're talking about Nike, and the best running store here near San Francisco. You walk into this store, they ask you to walk. They ask questions. Are you a runner or are you a hiker? They ask you. They measure your foot, and they come back with one pair of shoe that the owner told me 95% of the time they buy. They don't come back with three. They don't let you choose.
I like that. I like that.
That's based on the analogy, and I think the story you guys know, the king that had two kids, and it says, "I'll give you my kingdom to the one that brings me the right stone." And one keeps running back and forth with different stones. The other guy is just waiting there looking. And then after the other guy did this about 20 times, he goes out, he picks up the stone, he comes back, and he gives it to the father, and he gets the kingdom. This thing about let's say, to ask the questions and to walk, because walking by the hand is great, but if you're walking by the hand and both of you don't know where you're going, no matter how good the grass is, it's not going to be a great trip. So, just think about, keep asking, why do you want to be on the grass anyway? You want to do this walk, why is this? I think this thing about the inquiry, which a lot of times makes people really upset in companies and stuff like that, especially when they think they know. But why do you want that? And so, well, what are you going to do when you get there? And why is that important for you? And you keep on going on all these things, you really get to really interesting things, and you find different ways to get them there. Because this thing of getting you by the hand is that they're fixed on the freaking grass, and there's a path there on the side, and it's actually shorter. But they, in their head, no, but I gotta go the grass. I gotta do the grass.
Very good. Fernando, any last comments? And then we're wrapping up at 2 hours 30.
Yeah.
1 hour.
I'll be very quick. I think the best source of a continuous ideation, and again, the definition of ideation in my mind is: are you solving a real problem? Are you doing the right thing for the customer? And really, the best sources are the customers, are the sales. Are you growing as an established company? If you're doing the right thing, you're growing your sales. As a tweak to that, I like to do A/B testing. I was in the semiconductor industry, and when we were producing chips, we did a lot of splits, which is basically A/B testing. You do one little tweak, and you see if more chips, if they yield more chips or not. And the customers can help you in that sense. And my software company that I was a CEO of, we did that quite a bit of A/B testing, rolled out one little feature, and see which customer like that. So that's my 2 cents. I never hired a consulting company, honestly, a formal consulting company for my ventures. So I don't have a lot of experience in that from that perspective.
Okay. So I think this is a wrap. Thank you. I'll remind the audience that this is a 4 events series. So the next one is going to happen in April, last week of April, and it's about action and how does one go from an idea and the business, and then makes it happen, because we get paralyzed by the size of the task. And actually, it's funny that someone mentioned the Olympic Games or something. One of my next speakers is going to be, he doesn't know yet, so if he's watching, he'll know, is an Olympic coach. And how does a person go from thinking, 4 years from now, I want to have Portugal in the Olympic Games, and you start building the team, and you practice and you train with that vision, not even knowing if you're going to be selected, not even knowing how do you jump into action. So the next one is going to be about action, which I think it's something that we brought up over and over again. Then we're going to have one about humanization, how diversity, inclusion, how profiling the right way, having mediated HR recruitment, having psychology, having this wellness, having mind, heart, right, and not the mushy just to say that we do it. It's doing the right stuff, the stuff that moves the needle. We don't need pink flowers or whatever the fuck on Women's Day. We need things that are really relevant and that move the company forward, that brings productivity, that brings results, that makes the company human, right? And at last, evolution, hybrid skills, what are the skills for the future. So April, July, and October, you're going to have 3 more awesome events with different speakers, international speakers, national speakers, left speakers, tall speakers, fat speakers, skinny speakers, whatever speakers. And hopefully you'll stay in touch, stay tuned, follow us. And thank you, guys. And hopefully the next event, you'll be on the audience side. Okay?
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Obrigado. It's nice to be with you guys. Great dancing.
Nice meeting you all, and
Great to meet you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Luisa.
Obrigado, Luisa.
Obrigado. Excelente.